welcome. Welcome to Southern Company, and we do have Laura, Samantha, and Rachel here with Southern Company with us today, and they will be presenting to you. Students, I do ask that you keep your microphone muted during the presentation. If you would like to communicate, if you will use the chat function. Also, I'm assuming there will be a question and answer at the end of the session, so that at that point you can actually be able to unmute yourselves and communicate with the speakers. Also, this session is being recorded so that it can be shared with additional viewers at a later time. If you choose or would feel more comfortable not having your camera on or being in the record session, you can certainly turn off your camera. Just know that that would only be shared with students who are interested in learning about Southern Company and their interview skills and tips. So just be aware that we are recording the session and you can choose to keep your camera on or off during the session. All right, and without further ado, I will pass it off to our speakers. I'm not sure who's going to be speaking first.
I am. Hey everyone, I'm Samantha Horton. I work for Alabama Power, and we are going to talk to you about interviewing skills in this virtual environment that we're getting really familiar with lately. So let's begin. So while we talk today, please feel free to submit questions through the chat. There's also, I think there should be a hand raise feature too, if you would rather do that. But just go ahead and submit something through the chat. We'll be monitoring it. You know, you can ask at the end, but we want this to be as interactive as possible. So please feel free just to let us know your questions. So Southern Company is a very large company with lots of small companies in it. So we have our electric utilities, Alabama Power, Georgia Power, Mississippi Power. We have our wholesale electric utilities like Southern Power, and all of it does stuff in 12 different states. It has, you know, you can see on there 41 solar and wind facilities. And Rachel works with them, and she'll be talking to us later today. So if you have any questions about Southern Power, you can ask her. And then we also have our natural gas utilities under Southern Company Gas, like AGL, Chattanooga Gas, and some others. And then we have other subsidiaries. I'm sure you may have heard of Southern Nuclear or Southern Link before, Power Secure. You can see all of that there. Okay, Rachel, next slide. So at Southern Company, we are constantly working with diversity and inclusion. We have a culture of council-owned culture and inclusion, and we get emails out at Alabama Power every Monday with all different tips. We've been getting them during this COVID time. We get an email with health and wellness. There's different yoga or HIIT activities that you can join in over Zoom during the day. And there's, you know, work from home advice, tips for Zoom, different topics that are covered. And always there's diversity articles in there as well. So looking at this pie chart, the part that I find the most interesting is, or one of the most interesting parts is the green pie slice. So 15 years is the average employee tenure. I think that's something really amazing about Southern Company. So on the last slide, you saw how big and wide the footprint of Southern Company is. It's not just in the Southeast anymore, like a lot of people assume. We're all over the country. And those 15 years that's the average. But I worked with a guy that he had over 52 years when he retired. And so one of the things we talked about at his retirement was how Andy Griffith was shown on TV, like it was being broadcast for the first time when he started with the power company. So just to think that, you know, you can spend a lifetime with this company and work in so many different areas is really something great about Southern Company. So Rachel? So what does Southern Company do? How do we make it happen? We like to say that we make, move, and sell it. So we make the energy in our generation facilities. We have lots of different variety of type of generation. And then we move it, which is our transmission, substation, distribution systems. I work in distribution. I've grown up in the distribution part of it. and then we sell it or consume it. And so that could be, your apartment or house that you live in Tuscaloosa, or it could be the hospital, it could be DCH, or it could be Mercedes-Benz down the road. There's just so many different types of customers that we sell to. So today, like I said, I'm Samantha Horton. I am a connectivity and innovation engineer for Alabama Power. And then we have Rachel, who works for Southern Power as a renewable asset manager. And then we have Laura, who is a real estate specialist for Alabama Power. So does anybody have any questions before we dive into the virtual interview tips? Does anybody have any questions about Southern Company? Okay, if not, we can start into the interview tips.
Hey everyone, my name is Laura Winston. Like Samantha said, I work in corporate real estate in the Shoreline Compliance Division of Alabama Power Company. I am a University of Alabama graduate from 2003, Roll Tide. While I was there, I was a member of the track and field cross country teams. And after leaving college, I went to law school, and I'm been a lawyer for almost 10 years. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a virtual interview and how it's different than in-person interviewing and how it's the same. So next slide, please. Okay, so it's easy to come up with some of these differences. Your virtual interview is revolving around technology. So you're not in person, so you're talking through the computer screen. So the technology that you have that's afforded to you needs to be the best that you can get. And we're really not accustomed to formal video chat. I mean, you and I both, get on FaceTime with our friends and family. We do some Zoom calls and that sort of thing, but the formality of video is really, we're not truly accustomed to it, unless you're in broadcast journalism and you're studying that sort of field. So some of the challenges that can be presented are the lack of viewing ability. So this has everything to do with the body language. So when you're on the screen, depending on what type of software that the company is using, you may not be able to see everyone's body language, their hands, their eyebrow raise, their facial expressions, all of those things. And so at the end of the day, you are in charge of your physical settings. So what you see in the background, if you're in a dorm room and it's a little messy, the company's going to see that. So that's just part of the challenges that you have to face when you're doing a virtual interview versus the traditional in-person interview, which most of us at some point in time have probably had at least one. You're still preparing in the same fashion as you would. You're there, in your best dress. You've researched your company, you've challenged yourself on the interview questions. You still show up early, even though in a virtual interview, you're in this waiting room, so to speak. So next slide, please. So after going through myself personally a interview virtually, I can tell you that your technology prep is key. And you really need to study it. You need to know what type of video conferencing software the company that you're interviewing for is using. There's some tweaks to it. Zoom and Google Meets have a few things that are different. I think Skype is completely different than Zoom, the way it operates. So most of these portals are free. So you can, just for fun, download them all and just, work with them yourself and kind of go through the navigation. There's some great YouTube videos that you can kind of get some help with on navigation. And so, like I said, you're going to familiarize yourself with how the video conferencing works. And the biggest
Who
thing
do you
that
think is?
I'm sorry.
I think that was an accident.
Okay, yeah. So just please, if you don't mind, just mute your yourselves for the time being until we have the Q&A session. So like I said, you're going to test your technology. So the best thing that I would suggest you do is to practice with a friend, to set up a Zoom call or a Google Meet. And if you wear headphones like I have in today, you're going to want to test those out. There's some things that you need to know to turn them on and test them. Battery life, was your computer charged up before you started the call? And those are just some little things that will surprise you if you don't go ahead and test them out. And this all comes into your connectivity with your internet. If you know that there's a certain area in your apartment or house or dorm that just doesn't have good connectivity, you don't want to be there when your interview happens. You want to be in a place where you have great connectivity, whether it's, in a private room in a library where you can, have some quiet time, or, even borrowing a graduate assistant's office. I mean, whatever you've got to do to have good connectivity while you're speaking is key, because the last thing you want to do is have breakups within your connection while you're trying to speak. A good backup source would be helpful, like a phone hotspot. Just say that if you do encounter some internet issues, you've got that backup available, so you can just take a second and fix it while you're on the interview. And then, like I said earlier, you want to check your space. So if you're in a place where it's not so clean and organized, you probably don't want to do your interview there, because you can the background is seen. And so, it's just like kind of dressing in your best. You want your background to be nice and orderly as well. You're going to want to find some good lighting. There is, if you in a dark area, dark room, there's some ways that you can brighten it up. That's another piece to test out. And then your posture, you're gonna want to sit up straight. You can tell if you're kind of slouching forward or kind of moving back. If you've got this thing where you're swinging back and forth, that's all that we can see during the interview, is you moving side to side, or flipping your hair and all that sort of thing. So you're gonna want, I'm not saying don't be, your normal self, but it's good to video yourself so you can see how you interact. It's surprising, really. So do that, test your tech. And then, so next, I'm going to turn it over back to Samantha to give the tips for the virtual interviews.
Yeah, so I agree with you on what you said about videoing yourself. It's usually really painful to watch that video, but it's so good and you learn so much. So I took a class during my MBA, and it was presentations. And the first thing we had to do was video ourselves at the beginning, and the end of the class, we videoed ourselves again. And it was so much easier to watch myself on that last one. So I really encourage everyone to try that. Okay, so here's some tips for some virtual interviews. So a lot of this is what Laura touched on, so we'll just kind of rehash that. So using a digital handshake. So you're not going to like reach up to your computer screen and shake someone's hand, we know that. But so how can we do that? We can do a head nod that we're understanding and engaging. You can smile, don't act like you're just staring at your computer. Really look at people's faces. I think it makes a big difference when you can see their faces too. So try to make your screen so you can see them and be able to just interact a little bit better. And so, also you can say hello. You can have small talk over a virtual interview. You want to just try to replicate that same feel of a regular interview, because if you can do that, that'll make the people that are interviewing you feel more comfortable too, because this is new for them too. And that's important to remember. It's not just you that's dealing with the new environment. Everyone is. So, digital handshake, practice that, come up with something. And then making sure you maintain eye contact. So looking at your camera and looking at the screen is important. I know it may be tempting to put a sticky note, we're out of view on the side of your computer where nobody can see it. But if you're staring off into the edge and talking, it'll probably look like you're reading, and they'll figure out what's going on. So I would encourage you not to do that. I think it's fine to have notes, to be able to reference those, to think of examples. And we'll talk about some different examples later on in the presentation and how to have those prepped, how good that is. But I think it's fine to have those in front of you. And then let's see, paying attention to how you sound. So that goes back to that videoing. If you want to practice with a friend, which I think is the best idea ever, friend, parent, sibling, whoever, you can have them record it on their side too, so you can see how you sound and what you look like from the video, not just from your own side. And I think that would be very beneficial, and that'll help you know how you sound. You want to also probably practice with different headphones and things. So I have headphones in today. My laptop, I learned the hard way that it doesn't use, the sound is not great. I sound muffled, kind of like I'm going through a tunnel or talking with my hand over my face, or maybe with a mask on. That's a good reference, I guess, nowadays. But so I had to invest in a pair of headphones. I think AirPods, any headphones that you have will probably work, but just make sure that they work with the platform that you're going to be using. If they're compatible with Teams, and make sure you know how to use that, change what sound and where everything's coming from, where your microphone is. So you may use the headphones, but maybe your microphone's still coming from your computer. So you need to, get those little details figured out on the front end. So that's why it's important to practice. You need to maintain good posture, like we talked about. If you can not sit in a swivel chair, it's usually best because you want to turn. So if you can get a nice sturdy chair and pull yourself up to the desk and, sit tall, I think that's the best way to make yourself do it. It's kind of a benefit of a virtual interview, is being able to force yourself to push yourself up and sit taller without looking a little awkward at the conference table in a regular interview. Use your face to show that you're engaged. It can be tilting your head a little and nodding when someone's talking so that you're listening and you're taking it in, you're being engaged. You just want to show that you're engaged the whole time. Let's see, you want to wait for the other person to finish speaking. So it can be really difficult with doing this virtually. Sometimes you may think someone's finished, and maybe it's a pause. Maybe it was a little delay in the audio, and then maybe they had a second part of the question that you're going to end up missing now. So I think it's good to kind of listen, nod, show that you're listening, wait, and be patient. And then a good way to transition is either to pause yourself and say, okay, let me think about that. That way you give yourself time to think about it, one, and to make sure that they were done. You can also, if you don't, let me think about that for a second, but you just need a few seconds to think, you could rephrase the question back to them. So if they said, tell me about a time when, you could say, okay, yeah, one time there was, and you give your example. And so that's, I think that's a good way to show that you listen to the question and make sure they're finished asking the question as well. So talking about the start of the question, so how do you finish? How do you finish answering and let them know that you're finished? I think, you can just say thank you at the end of your question, or you can nod your head. But don't let it just kind of hang out and make it look like you're thinking off into another world trying to figure out what to say next. You want to make sure that they understand that you're finished with that question. Let's see. And then we want to treat the interview like a conversation. So we've said that multiple times. You don't want it to be a stiff, awkward video interview. And I think that anyone in the interview can make that that stiffness go away. I think you as the interviewee or the interviewers can do it. But I think if you can show that as being the person who's interviewing, that shows that company or whoever you're interviewing with, a depth of skills that you have. So I think you can use these virtual interview tips and use it to your benefit. Practice now. This is an easy way to kind of get ahead, is to practice now and do this. Does anybody have any questions so far? If not, Rachel?
Yeah, before we get back into the slides, I just wanted to reiterate what Samantha was talking about on the cues. There are going to be some silences throughout your interview. It's going to be folks on the panel that are going to be reviewing their questions or choosing a question before they ask you. And so don't let that scare you if you're not hearing anything. Now, of course, if you get into the interview and you hadn't heard a thing in 1 or 2 minutes, you might want to test your audio, but it's okay to have those silences. And if you do, if you're about to answer a question and you need a minute, just speak to that. Just say, let me think about this for just a second, or give me 1 moment, please. And, gather your thoughts, because this is supposed to be a comfortable environment, as well as awkward as it may feel at first. And when you're going through your answers, the best thing that I figured out on how to end my answer is just to say thank you afterwards. It's a great cue to let the interviewer know that you're finished with your question, so you're not rambling, or that you're ready to move on. So I did see a question in the chat from Claire. What is a good way of ending a virtual interview and asking how to follow up? That's a really good question. So I think it's important to take cues from your interviewer. When I did a virtual interview in April, and there's always a lead on the panel. It may be a manager of some sort that they'll typically go around the room and ask everyone if they have any final stays or final questions or anything they want to ask. So, and then they'll also come to you and say, is there anything that you would like to add or ask? I think that's a great opportunity for you to ask a question, something that was not asked through the interview, whether it's, can you tell me more about how your employees serve their communities, or give time of service, or, it could be something specific to the job requirements, whatever it is. I think it's great to ask a question. If you don't have questions, I would just simply end it like you would in person, thanking all the folks for being there, and for the opportunity to interview, and show gratitude for that. Did that answer your question, Claire? If not, I can have Samantha and Rachel weigh in as well.
Yes, that answered my question. Thank you.
Great. Okay, so we're going to move on to personal branding. So a personal brand is what people say about you when you leave the room. That was said by Jeff Bezos from Amazon, and I think that's a really accurate way of kind of seeing what you got during during an interview or during a meeting. So let's just touch on this for a few minutes, because I think it's really important when you're in a virtual environment to showcase a little bit more than you are able to in person. So personal brand, what is it? These can be tangible assets, such as your years of experience, what you're majoring in. For artists or people that are doing trades, it may be their portfolios and their artwork, maybe some of the awards that you've received in college. So those are all tangible personal brand items that you can add to your interview or your resume. Some of the intangible things are things that you can't really put about a price on. This is your personality stuff. This is your sense of humor. You know, what inspires you every day, from, you know, what your passion is, and how insightful that you are, just leading your day-to-day life. So some personal branding questions that you may want to ask yourself when you're trying to develop this would be, you know, what makes you indispensable? What makes you worth hiring over somebody else? What are your goals? Are you learning anything new? What do you do better than anyone else? You know, and maybe some single words of strength. You know, what words best describe you? What words best describe how you communicate with people? Which leads me into the leadership identity dynamic of a personal brand. So how do you describe your style? You know, are you a disruptor? You know, are you a mentor? Do you motivate people? Are you able to get groups together, team build and network, and get all the answers to your questions solved relatively quickly because you have such a vast network? So these are just some things. You can Google these things and kind of get a little bit more familiar with these, but these are terms of art that are designed into a personal brand strategy. So if you're interested, I would definitely recommend just researching those words a little bit more to understand what it means. And then you've got your elevator pitch, which is this 30-second kind of commercial style about you. I gave like a little portion of it before I started the presentation, or my portion of the presentation. And so this is something that that's going to evolve over time, because what your elevator pitch at 21 is not going to be the same when you're 41, right? Because you've got experience and you've held probably a few more jobs than that. But what you want it to do is, it needs to be something that, and granted, this is where it got the word from, that if you were getting on an elevator with your CEO or some kind of executive level management, and they asked you who you were, where do you work, or, you know, tell me about yourself, that from getting on the elevator to getting off the elevator, which would take about 30 seconds depending on floors, that you could give a really good detailed explanation about who you are. So this is your commercial. So you want it to be clear and brief and tell everybody what they need to know. So this could come into, you know, where you're from, your education, where you went to school, you know, what you're majoring in, where you work at this present time, and that sort of thing. And it just kind of gives them a brief overview of who you are. I think everybody needs to have this. You may have something kind of already set up, but customize it, tweak it, make it where if you've got the CEO in the elevator with you, it's formal. Make it casual. So if you're, you know, going to an event on campus, that you can just deliver yourself in that 30-second span. But this is something that they're going to ask you at the beginning of the interview, almost 100% of the time. Can you tell me a little bit about yourself? And this is your opportunity to shine, but be brief. And so I definitely recommend you having this, you know, where you can watch yourself on video and listen to your tone while you're delivering your elevator pitch. So next slide. And I'm going to turn it over to Rachel.
Thanks, Laura. I appreciate it. So good afternoon. I'm Rachel Petrie, and I work for Southern Power. And so similarly to what we just talked about for our background and history, I've been with the company for 17 years. So I'm one of those that contributes to that 15-year time frame or more. I went to Southern Company right out of college, and I graduated from the University of Alabama with a degree in mechanical engineering, and then got my MBA from Alabama. So again, I work for Southern Power, which is a little bit different than Alabama and Georgia Power, the regulated utilities. I work for the wholesale entity of Southern Power. And so we own 10 gigawatts of renewable energy plus battery storage, fuel cells, and natural gas across 12 states. So in my career at Southern Company, I've gotten the opportunity to work through multiple opcos, or the retail companies, Georgia Power, Southern Company, and Southern Power. This is my second tenure here. But the ability to be flexible and work within a large company is a great bonus of working for Southern Company, that you can have a lot of different hats and a lot of different roles within the company. So I'm going to dive into common interview questions. I have interviewed both within Southern and external to Southern. So I'm going to give you some tips and tricks, but I'm going to say most of this is really geared towards internal to Southern Company. You can ask a lot of people who have probably interviewed within Southern Company. It is a little bit unique in our interview styles to what external companies look like. And so just in general for Southern Company, and typically but not always, you will have a panel for an interview selection committee. So that means that's typically 4 people up to 6 or 7 people in the same either virtual call, possibly in the same room. It just depends on, you know, what's going on at the time, that will be asking you questions. Also, typically they go around and each person asks you one or 2 questions. And so they'll take turns. So I'm just going to give you a couple common interview questions, and then we're going to talk about a good process to answer questions. So I do suggest that you practice interview questions, and this is virtual and, you know, a normal interview in person. I would highly recommend this. And like Laura mentioned, you know, the first question. The first question is your elevator pitch. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what makes you a good hire or fit for this position. Have that one nailed, right? Iron that one out, have it practiced and smooth, right? So, you know, in my past, I've said it's typically between 2 and at the most 4 to 5 minutes long. You know, 4 to 5 minutes is really a long time, but if you have a lot of extensive experience, it would be good to highlight it. 2 to 3 minutes is probably the right mix for somebody in college, just depending on your experience level. Other common interview questions, just be prepared for, you know, what is one of your strengths? What is one of your weaknesses? Give me an example of a leadership or problem solving time that you've had to solve a problem or work with a team. There's so many other questions, but we also know at the end, you know, there's always the, do you have any questions for us? So be prepared at a minimum, right, for at least these 4, and have them just your example in mind and have them smooth and rehearsed, that you don't have to spend a whole lot of time thinking through, you know, what am I going to say? Just know in advance that these are going to be the questions. Also, you know, I think Samantha mentioned this as well. Be sure to thank the interviewers, and don't forget to tell them why you want the job. Tell them why you're the best fit. It's totally acceptable at this point. You know, you're in the interview. Tell them, I'm a great candidate for this position because I believe I can, you know, and give another solid example at the end. Put a bow on it and say, this is why I want this job. Don't leave any question. And I've been on the interview panel side that, you know, we've walked away after the interviewer leaves and like, do they want the job? Like, don't ever leave them wondering, I think they want the job. They didn't really tell me that they want this job. You know, say it. So I'm gonna go to the next slide. And
Hey, Rachel,
yeah,
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but
sure.
We do have a question in the chat from Bennett. He asked, is it appropriate to ask at the end of the interview, is there any reason you would not move forward with me in the hiring process? I'm always looking for ways to improve and better myself going forward.
So
you want to answer that before I do?
I'll take a stab. Sure, I'll take a stab. So I personally would not ask exactly a question quite like that. for a couple reasons. You don't want them to leave the interview thinking something with the last thought being negative, right? You're asking, why wouldn't you hire me?
Right.
Well, right now they're starting to think, why wouldn't I hire you? Like, you don't want that to be the last thought they have walking out the door. It is perfectly fine to say, you know, I'd love to follow up with some feedback. Really appreciate your time. I think I'm an excellent fit. But I personally wouldn't ask for negative feedback at the very end of your interview. Go ahead, Laura or Samantha.
I was just gonna reiterate what you said. It just sounds super forward to me. You know, if I was on the panel and somebody asked me that, it sounds like you want me to make a decision right now. And you might have been the first person we'd interviewed. You don't know. I mean, we could have like a whole lineup for that day. So, you know, that to me is putting the pressure. I wouldn't go that route. I would go the route of, would you mind following up with me? I'm always looking for ways to improve and better myself going forward. I would love to hear, you know, anything that you might be able to help me with on the interview process, if that's something that you feel comfortable saying. Samantha, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. And I think once you have a full-time job, and if you're going to want to continue to work for the company for a long time, and you're starting to look at you've been in an area for 2 years maybe, and now you want to look somewhere else, I think a great time to ask that question is on the back end of an interview, either after you get the job or if you don't get the job. I think it's probably even more beneficial if you don't get the job, just to ask that hiring manager, hey, can you give me some feedback? I would love to improve. But I like the way that y'all turned it and made it sound a lot more positive on the front end too. But I think at the end, it's always good to ask for feedback after they let you know their decision. And I see we have
we have
another
one more
question. Yeah. So this question is from Erica. How important is it to have questions at the end of an interview? What do you feel it adds to the interview? Laura or Rachel, do y'all want to start?
I think it shows engagement. You know, when I've been on a panel, I've always appreciated when people have asked questions. When you get that afforded opportunity, usually at the end of the interview, they ask you, do you have any questions for us? And I think that is a really good opportunity for you to showcase something that you're interested in. And it doesn't have to be necessarily you know, about the job specific. I remember when I first got hired on to the company, my manager came back and told me that she thought my last question was really good. And I was thinking back, I was like, well, what was it that I was asking? And when they asked me if I had any questions for them, I said, I do. What are some of the ways that your employees are involved in the company outside of work? Do y'all have service opportunities? Is there a community? And it really kind of lit some people up on the panel, and they started talking about the things that our employees do for service, and you know, the organizations that we hold and that sort of thing. So I believe, in my opinion, that it does add to the interview, because you're showing engagement and you're showing interest, but you're also kind of, you know, showing a community. You're showing that, you know, that you want to learn as much as you can in the opportunity that you're afforded. Now, I'm not saying like have, you know, 7 questions and say, well, let me start with number 1 and let me start with, you know, 2 and 3. This is your time to give one shot question, be brief about it, let them answer, and I think that's plenty. What do y'all think, ladies?
So I would also agree. I've been on panels, again, where a person did not ask a question. You know, typically at the end of a panel, a person will say, what questions do you have for us? And it feels a little dull when somebody says, nothing, I'm good. It's just that kind of really awkward, like, okay. So it does show some thoughtfulness. And, you know, you're always welcome to clarify even at that point something you may not have even understood about the job description, who the team is, what does the team look like, what would success look like for this job. There's lots of things that you can show in that question to show that you're really trying to match, is this a good fit for me too, right? Like interviews go both ways. So I want to understand if the company is a good fit for me and not just I'm a good fit for you guys. Sam, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, I think it's important to not use this time to say, when can I hear back from you? Because I know it's, you go to the interview and you're excited and you want to hear back right away and you want to know when you're going to hear, but use this time, like Laura and Rachel have said, to ask, a more in-depth question about the job or the roles of the people on the team, not timelines of hearing back, because I've had people ask that too. And usually your HR representative is going to voice that at the end of the interview or send you an email afterwards letting you know that.
Yeah, there's a fine line between engagement and eagerness. You can get eager when you're, on the job, but you don't want to show those vibes that, you need an answer today, because we all know that's just unrealistic.
I agree. And real quick, I'm going to do a time check. So it's 2:43. What time do we stop on this again? Is it 2:45 or do we have till 3?
You can actually go up until 3.
Okay.
So you may want to come to, just kind of question and answer time for the students, but it sounds like they're being very engaging.
That's good. No, I appreciate it. Keep with the questions. I've just got one more slide and I think that'll wrap it up. So let me walk through this because this was something that was very helpful in preparing for interviews for me and thinking through how to answer questions. And it's called the STAR method. So I'm not sure if y'all have ever heard this, but this has been a tool that I've literally used for at least 15 years. And I would highly recommend it, again, especially for Southern, because the type of questions that Southern Company asks, they are looking for this. So let me talk a little bit about what that is. So your first question in the interview, we talked about that. Tell us why you're a good fit for this job, not the STAR method. The ending, again, tell us what why you'd be a good fit or why you want this job or any questions for us, not the STAR method. Everything in the middle is the STAR method. Every single question just about they're asking in between that first question and that last question. Even if it sounds like a one answer question, is never a one answer question in an interview. There is no one answer question. What they're asking for is give us an example of a time that you have demonstrated whatever it is. Whether they say it that completely or not, that is what they are asking you for. And so this STAR method, just a couple tips. So prepare a lot of examples before you start your interview. Think of, I worked on this project and I would like to highlight these things. I had a leadership role, it was a successful project, we had this amount of budget to work with, whatever it looks like that you want to highlight, think through those examples. Think about a time that you had a difficult team that you had to step up and take charge of or, support. Think of a time that you volunteered, think through at least 3 to 5 very solid examples in your personal life, that you can apply to generic questions in an interview. So then listen during the interview and think of one of your prepared examples as they're asking the question. Then quickly plan and organize your answer using this STAR method. It should only be about 5 to 8 seconds. And again, I think Laura and Sam both mentioned, because it's virtual and they may not be able to see your body language or they think the camera's frozen, right? Give them some verbal cue. Great question. Let me think about that for just a sec. All right. That's all you need, right? Just to organize your thoughts for just a second. You can always ask, can you repeat that second part of that question, or can you repeat the whole question, make sure I understand it, or state it back to them? So the STAR method helps you create a direct and logical and effective storytelling to demonstrate an answer to an interview question. So STAR stands for, S is for situation, T is for task, A is for action, R is result. So these are the 4 different components you need in your answer for every single question in between the first and the last. So you need to be able to describe and give them a brief example, the background, situation. Where were you at? I was in school my senior year, my senior project in, thermo or fluids or whatever it was. The task, the problem, and the challenge. My senior project was describe the problem and challenge. Then action, explain specifically what you did and how you solved it. And it is great to give accolades to a team. It's always part of a team. I would encourage you to mention a team, but you need to strongly show what you did and how you solved it, and not just how the team overall came out. And then finally is just the result. Make sure you don't leave them questioning what was the benefit or what was the outcome, what was the savings or whatever it is that you want to make sure you're telling them. This was a great example. Here's why. So again, situation, task, action, result. You can Google it. STAR method is out there, but I would highly recommend, as you're thinking through 3 to 5 examples, that you think through how to explain it in those ways.
So good.
So that's the really our presentation. We would love more Q&A if there's any more questions out there.
Can I just add on to the STAR method one thing? In my last panel that I was on to interview someone, I remember the person that actually got hired was so great at storytelling. I mean, it was just sounded very easy for him to give his explanations, and they were probably very scripted. He probably wrote out exactly what he was going to say and memorized it, but he just had this real sense of ease when he was delivering his story, and it just flowed, and it just came so naturally to him. So when he left the interview, everyone was sitting around saying, wow, that was smooth, that was so it just knocked it out of the park because of that preparation in your storytelling throughout the STAR method.
I wanted to comment from the career side perspective. We certainly highly support the STAR method and definitely have a lot of resources on our website and our career guides that support the STAR method. And actually, just previous to us joining today for this session, I went and spoke to a class, and I gave them a STAR method handout and said, okay, situation, task, action, result. Let's work it out. Think about those scenarios. How is it that you have had these experiences, and how can you tell your story? And it's very important. One concern was, well, I don't want to sound like a robot. Well, Laura, you said that it's a storytelling. And as you're telling the story, you're checking those boxes. You're saying, okay, I set that up well. I told them kind of what the task was. I said, hey, here's what I've got to do. And here was the result. We see so many times that students in interviews, they stop at the action and they don't come back with a result. So that's the biggest
we've
thing.
Had to actually ask that. Yeah, we've had to ask questions like that in interviews. So what happened? They're like, they've given us everything, and then the plot thickens, and then we don't know how the ending goes.
Like,
so
you're leaving me hanging here. You're leaving me hanging.
That's right. So the storytelling it gets better with practice. When you're writing out those example questions, that you're familiarizing yourself, it's going to be just as good in your delivery as you have practiced it. It's just like learning a song. There's a new song on the radio. Gosh, I just told myself how old I am. You've downloaded a new song and you're like, I love this song, and you want to learn the words. Well, you got to listen to it over and over and over and over to memorize the words so you can sing it, right? So it's the same with interview questions. You're going to be able to deliver it concisely and briefly if you practice, and that's what you have to do. So are we ready for questions? And I'm not opposed to people unmuting themselves and asking questions directly instead of over the chat. However y'all want to do it.
I tell you, if it's okay, I can stop recording now so that students may feel a little bit more comfortable coming on camera and speaking. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that. And